The morning sun cast long shadows across the purple grasslands as Doctor adjusted her field equipment one final time. The young had spent 3 years studying the planet's most dangerous predator, and today marked her closest approach to a packed territory. At 26, she was the youngest researcher ever assigned to the project, a fact that her colleagues never let her forget. "Are you absolutely certain about this approach, Vector?" Doctor's voice crackled through her comm unit, as the expedition leader had made his disapproval of her research methods abundantly clear. "The pack behavior models suggest they'll be most active in this sector." Checked her scanner readings and smiled. "That's exactly why I need to be here. We've been studying from a distance for 5 years. The only way to understand their pack dynamics is through direct observation." They were unlike any predator discovered in human space. Standing 4 feet at the shoulder with muscular builds that rippled beneath midnight black fur, they possessed intelligence that bordered on sapience. Their eyes glowed with an eerie silver light, and they moved with a fluid grace that made them nearly invisible in dense forests. Most terrifying of all was their pack coordination. They could communicate across vast distances through subsonic calls that human equipment could barely detect. "Direct observation from a safe distance," reminded her. "Remember what happened to the Meridian survey team." His jaw tightened. The Meridian incident had occurred before her arrival on. An entire research team of 8 scientists had vanished without a trace, leaving only shredded equipment and strange claw marks on the trees. The official report blamed, though no bodies were ever found. "I'm not planning to walk up and shake hands with them," replied, adjusting her camouflage field generator. The device would mask her heat signature and scent from the sensitive predators. "I'll maintain a 2-kilometer safety perimeter and use the long-range sensors." "Just remember," Dr. Sarah's voice joined the conversation, "we're dealing with apex predators that have never encountered humans before our arrival. They have no fear of us and every reason to see us as either prey or competition." Appreciated's concern, as the team's behavioral specialist, understood better than anyone how dangerous they could be, but had a theory that the others weren't ready to hear. In her months of studying recorded encounters, she had noticed patterns that suggested they weren't simply mindless killers. Their attacks showed strategy, even mercy in some cases. She needed proof before she could convince the scientific community. "I'll be careful," promised, signing off from the comm channel. She shouldered her pack, heavy with recording equipment and emergency supplies, and began her trek toward the heart of pack territory. The landscape was breathtaking in its alien beauty. Towering crystalline formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, while bioluminescent vines wound around ancient tree trunks that grew in perfect spirals. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an almost magical quality, though knew it was simply the result of unique atmospheric particles that reflected light in unusual ways. As she walked, her scanner picked up increasing signs of activity. Claw marks scored the crystal formations, and the distinctive musk scent grew stronger with each kilometer. Her heart rate increased, but she forced herself to maintain a steady pace. Fear would only cloud her judgment. 3 hours into her journey, equipment began to malfunction. Her scanner flickered and died, followed by her comm unit and GPS locator. Only her emergency beacon remained functional, but she was too far from base camp for it to be effective. "Not good," she muttered, tapping the side of her scanner. Nothing happened. She was effectively blind in one of the most dangerous regions on the planet. The smart thing to do would be to turn back immediately, but had spent months preparing for this expedition, and she was finally close enough to observe pack behavior firsthand. She made a decision that would have horrified her colleagues. She pressed on, relying only on her training and instincts. The forest grew denser as she advanced, the crystalline formations becoming more frequent and elaborate. Some stood nearly 20 meters tall, forming natural corridors that channeled the wind into haunting melodies. It was beautiful, but beauty often masked deadly danger. A low growl froze in place. 50 meters ahead, a single emerged from behind a crystal formation. It was larger than any she had seen in the archived footage, its silver eyes fixed directly on her despite her camouflage field. The predator's head tilted slightly, as if it was curious rather than aggressive. Remained perfectly still, barely breathing. Everything she had learned about behavior suggested that movement would trigger an attack response. The creature studied her for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, then released a subsonic call that felt more than heard. The response was immediate and terrifying. Answering calls echoed from all directions as more materialized from the crystal maze. Within moments, found herself surrounded by the entire pack, nearly 20 of the deadly predators, each one weighing close to 300 kilograms of pure muscle and fang. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they formed a perfect circle around her, maintaining a distance of about 10 meters. Their behavior was unlike anything in the research database. They seemed to be studying her, much as she had been studying them. The pack leader, distinguished by silver markings on its forehead, approached closer than the others. Its eyes held an intelligence that made breath catch. This wasn't just an animal. There was something almost human in the way it observed her. Knew she should activate her emergency beacon and hope that the rescue team could reach her in time. But something held her back. They weren't behaving aggressively. If they had wanted to kill her, she would already be dead. Instead, they seemed to be waiting for something. The pack leader released another subsonic call and the circle began to tighten. Not aggressively, but with the patience of experienced hunters. They were hurting her, realized. But toward what? As if in response to her thoughts, the pack leader turned and began walking deeper into the crystal forest. The other maintained their positions, clearly indicating that should follow. She had no choice. Attempting to flee would only trigger their hunting instincts. With her heart pounding against her ribs, began to walk in the direction the pack leader had indicated. They moved with her, maintaining their careful formation. It was like being escorted by the deadliest honor guard in the galaxy. The forest opened into a clearing dominated by structures that definitely weren't natural. Ancient walls of black stone rose from the ground, covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The architecture was unlike anything in human records, flowing and organic, as if the buildings had grown rather than been constructed. The pack leader approached the largest structure and placed its paw on a crystal formation embedded in the wall. The crystal began to glow, and symbols lit up in sequence across the entire complex. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. Scientific mind raced. These were ruins of some kind, clearly predating human arrival on by thousands, possibly millions of years. But why had they brought her here? And why were they standing back, watching her with what could only be described as expectation? The pack leader looked directly at her and released a sound unlike any call she had heard before. It was almost musical, rising and falling in complex patterns that seemed designed to convey meaning rather than simple emotion. Took a hesitant step toward the glowing structure. They didn't react aggressively, so she took another step. The symbols on the walls grew brighter as she approached, and she could feel a strange energy building in the air around her. Whatever was about to happen, knew that her life, and possibly the future of human relations, would never be the same. She reached out toward the nearest crystal formation, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. The moment her skin made contact with the ancient crystal, the world exploded into light and sensation. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was the pack leader's silver eyes, glowing with what looked remarkably like approval. In the depths of the ancient ruins, something that had been waiting for millions of years finally stirred to life, sensing the presence of the species it had been designed to find. Consciousness returned to slowly, like swimming up from the depths of a dark ocean. Her head throbbed with a pain unlike anything she had ever experienced, and strange images flashed behind her closed eyelids, symbols, mathematical equations, and star charts that seemed impossibly complex, yet somehow familiar. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a smooth platform inside the largest structure. The walls around her pulsed with gentle bioluminescent patterns, and the air hummed with energy that made her skin tingle. Most remarkably, she wasn't alone. The entire pack had arranged themselves in a semicircle around her platform, but their posture had changed completely. Instead of the predatory alertness she had observed earlier, they now sat with an almost reverent stillness. Their silver eyes reflected the light from the walls, creating an otherworldly constellation in the dim chamber. Sat up carefully, testing for injuries. Apart from the headache, she seemed unharmed. Her equipment pack lay nearby, and she was surprised to see that her scanner was now functioning perfectly. The display showed readings that made no scientific sense, energy signatures that fluctuated in patterns too complex to be natural, and gravitational anomalies that suggested the ruins existed partially outside normal spacetime. "What is this place?" she whispered, more to herself than expecting an answer. To her amazement, the pack leader responded with a series of subsonic calls that somehow conveyed meaning directly to her mind. Images flooded her consciousness, not words, but pure concepts that bypassed language entirely. The ruins were a testing facility, built by an ancient civilization that had vanished long before humans had even developed agriculture. The builders called themselves the architects, and they had seeded the galaxy with similar installations on worlds where they detected specific conditions. Had been chosen because of its unique crystalline formations, which could amplify and focus certain types of energy. More images flowed through the connection, the architects themselves, tall beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form eons ago. They had been searching for a species capable of what they called harmonic bonding, the ability to form deep connections with other intelligent life forms across species barriers. "You're saying they were looking for someone like humans?" asked aloud, still struggling to process the information flooding her mind. The pack leader approached her platform and gently placed its massive paw on her hand. The contact intensified the connection, and suddenly could sense the thoughts and emotions of the entire pack. They weren't just animals. They were individuals with personalities, fears, hopes, and a collective intelligence that rivaled any civilization humans had encountered. Through their shared consciousness, she learned their true name for themselves, which roughly translated to guardians of the ancient ways. They had been protecting these ruins for generations, waiting for the arrival of a species that could activate the architect technology. Previous attempts with other species had ended in failure. Some had lacked the mental flexibility, others the emotional capacity, and a few had been destroyed by the very power they tried to wield. But humans were different. The genetic markers that the architect scans had detected in its DNA indicated that her species possessed a rare combination of traits: high adaptability, strong emotional intelligence, and most importantly, the ability to form bonds with beings completely unlike themselves. It was this last trait that had convinced them to bring her to the ruins rather than eliminate her as a threat. "But why me specifically?" wondered, and immediately received her answer through the mental link. The architects had programmed their systems to recognize potential test subjects through behavioral patterns rather than just genetics. Decision to study despite the danger, her willingness to enter their territory alone, and most importantly, her refusal to flee when confronted by the pack. All of these actions had marked her as someone with the courage and curiosity necessary for the trials ahead. Pack leader, whose name, she learned, was something like Ra, shared a warning through their connection. The activation of the ruins had not gone unnoticed. Somewhere in the depths of space, ancient automated systems were stirring to life, drawn by the energy signature of active architect technology. Some of these systems were benevolent, designed to offer knowledge and assistance to worthy species. Others were guardians, programmed to test and potentially eliminate civilizations that might misuse architect power. And then there were the Devourers. The images that accompanied this concept filled with primal terror. The Devourers were what remained of a species that had found architect ruins millions of years ago and used the technology to transform themselves into something monstrous. They had become creatures of pure hunger, consuming the life force of entire worlds to fuel their continued existence. The architects had managed to contain them before vanishing from the physical universe, but the containment was not permanent. Every time architect ruins became active, the Devourers sensed it and began working to break free from their prison. The only way to reinforce the containment was for a new species to prove themselves worthy of the architect's full legacy, to pass trials that would demonstrate not just intelligence and adaptability, but wisdom and restraint in the use of power. So this is all a test, realized, and if humanity fails. The answer came not in words, but in images, dead worlds, their surfaces scoured clean of life, their atmospheres poisoned with the emanations of creatures that had once been people like her. The Devourers would be free to resume their endless hunger, and they would start with the worlds closest to the newly activated ruins. Earth was only 6 months away by hyperspace. Ra sent a pulse of reassurance through their connection. They had been preparing for this moment for generations. They understood the risks and the potential rewards better than anyone. If humans could prove themselves worthy, they would gain access to technology that could revolutionize their civilization, clean energy that could power entire star systems, medical advances that could eliminate disease and extend by centuries. and perhaps most valuable of all, the ability to communicate with any intelligent species they encountered. But first, they had to survive what was coming. The ruins around them began to change, walls reshaping themselves into new configurations as ancient systems came online. Through her enhanced senses, could feel the facility preparing for the trials ahead. Combat simulators were powering up, testing chambers were calibrating themselves to human physiology, and deep in the facility's core, something vast and patient was awakening. "How long do we have?" asked. The answer came with mathematical precision transmitted directly to her consciousness. The nearest automated guardian system was already en route and would arrive within 72 hours. It would conduct the first trial, a test of courage and adaptability in combat conditions. If humanity passed, they would face progressively more challenging trials. If they failed at any stage, the guardian systems would sterilize not just but every world in human space. His first instinct was panic. How could she possibly prepare her entire species for trials she didn't even understand? But then she felt the steady presence of the pack around her, their unwavering confidence in her abilities. They had waited so long for this moment, and they believed that humans were the species the architects had been seeking. Through her connection with Ra, she began to understand the broader picture. The trials wouldn't just test her, they would test humanity's ability to work with other species, to form the kind of bonds that could unite different civilizations against common threats. They would be her partners in this endeavor, not just observers. A new sound echoed through the chamber, not the subsonic calls of but something deeper and more resonant. The central platform began to rise, revealing a shaft that descended into the heart of the facility. Ancient lights flickered to life along the walls, illuminating symbols that seemed to move and shift when observed directly. The first trial was beginning. Stood up, feeling the weight of her species' future on her shoulders. But she wasn't facing it alone. Around her, the pack rose as one, their eyes glowing with determination and something that looked remarkably like hope. Together, they began their descent into the depths of the facility, toward trials that would determine whether humanity would join the ranks of the architect's chosen species, or become another cautionary tale in the galaxy's long and often tragic history. Behind them, the ruins sealed themselves, preparing for the battle that was already racing toward through the cold depths of space. The descent into the facility's core took them through passages that conventional architecture. Corridors curved in impossible directions, and gravity seemed to shift orientation without warning, yet somehow they always found themselves walking normally rather than falling. This enhanced connection with the allowed her to sense their amazement, even they had never penetrated this deeply into the ruins. As they traveled deeper, became aware of changes occurring within herself. The strange energy permeating the facility was rewriting something fundamental in her genetic structure. She could feel dormant neural pathways awakening, senses expanding beyond their normal limitations. Colors became more vivid, sounds carried layers of meaning she had never perceived before, and most remarkably, she could sense the emotional states of every in the pack as clearly as her own feelings. This is what the architects intended, she realized. The trials weren't just tests of worthiness. They were a transformation process designed to elevate promising species to a higher level of consciousness and capability. The passage opened into a vast spherical chamber whose walls were covered in flowing script that seemed to write itself continuously. At the center of the space, a holographic display materialized, showing what appeared to be a real-time view of space around. Red markers indicated incoming objects, dozens of them, approaching from different vectors at incredible speeds. Ra sent a pulse of information through their link. The objects were Architect Guardian drones, automated systems that had been dormant for millions of years, but now responded to the activation of the testing facility. Each drone represented a different type of trial. Some would test physical capabilities, others mental acuity, still others the ability to work in harmony with alien allies. But something was wrong with the pattern of their approach. According to the ancient protocols embedded in racial memory, the Guardians should arrive sequentially, allowing time for recovery between trials. Instead, they were converging simultaneously, as if something had corrupted their programming. The answer materialized in the holographic display as new markers appeared, massive, dark shapes moving through hyperspace with predatory intent. The Devourers had detected the activation of the facility much faster than anticipated. and their prison ships were already breaking free from their containment fields. They're forcing an accelerated trial sequence, breathed, understanding flooding through her enhanced consciousness. Their hopping humanity will fail under pressure, and the containment will collapse completely. A new voice echoed through the chamber, not subsonic communication, but something that bypassed sound entirely and spoke directly to the mind. It was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons in every syllable. Greetings, children of Earth. I am the curator, last guardian of architect knowledge. Your species has triggered the final protocol, and events now move beyond any ability to delay or reconsider. You will face all trials simultaneously, or your civilization will be marked for termination. The implications hit like a physical blow. Her research team, her family back on Earth, billions of humans who had no idea their fate was being decided in an ancient alien facility, all of them depending on her success. I can't do this alone, she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. You will not be alone, the curator replied. They have chosen to bond their fate with yours. Success will elevate both species. Failure will doom both to extinction. Around her, the pack pressed closer, their minds linking more deeply with hers. Through their shared consciousness, she felt their absolute determination. They had waited so long for this moment, prepared for generations to guide a worthy species through the trials. They believed in humanity's potential, even if she struggled to believe in it herself. The chamber began to transform, walls reshaping themselves into a series of interconnected platforms. Each platform would host a different trial, and all would need to be completed simultaneously. Failure in any single trial would doom the entire attempt. The first platform materialized combat scenarios, holographic enemies that moved with deadly precision, environments that shifted from jungle to Arctic wasteland to the vacuum of space without warning. This would test physical adaptability and the ability to fight alongside alien allies. The second platform housed mathematical puzzles of staggering complexity, three-dimensional equations that seemed to exist in dimensions human minds weren't designed to process. This tested raw intelligence and the capacity for abstract thinking. The third platform contained what appeared to be a diplomatic simulation, representatives of dozens of alien species, each with their own cultural triggers and communication methods. Success would require understanding and empathy across vast differences in biology and psychology. The fourth platform showed a dying world, its ecosystem collapsing under the weight of industrial pollution and warfare. This was a test of wisdom, the ability to heal rather than destroy, to preserve rather than exploit. The fifth and final platform remained shrouded in darkness, its purpose hidden even from the curator's explanation. The final trial reveals itself only to those who prove worthy of its challenges, was all the ancient AI would say. How can I possibly manage all of these at once? Asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what was expected. The answer came through her connection with the pack. She wouldn't have to manage them alone. The bond they had formed allowed them to share not just thoughts and emotions, but capabilities. Through their link, she could access the combat instincts of Ra, the mathematical processing power of the pack's strategist, the empathic abilities of their youngest member Ra, and the ancient wisdom of their elder. In return, they could access her human perspective, the lateral thinking that allowed her species to find unconventional solutions, the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had driven humanity to the stars, and most importantly, the ability to see potential for cooperation where other species saw only differences. The trials began without warning. On the combat platform, holographic warriors materialized, creatures of living shadow that moved faster than thought and struck with weapons that could cut through reality itself. Found herself moving with Ra's fluid grace, her human creativity guiding instincts to create fighting techniques that neither species could have developed alone. Simultaneously, her mind worked through the mathematical puzzles with processing power enhanced by human intuition. Where pure logic led to dead ends, human creativity found unexpected pathways through seemingly impossible equations. The diplomatic simulation proved even more challenging. Each alien representative spoke through different sensory modalities, some through color changes, others through chemical emissions, still others through gravitational field fluctuations. But Ra's empathic gifts, combined with human ability to recognize patterns in communication, allowed them to establish meaningful dialogue even across vast biological differences. The ecological restoration trial demanded a different approach. Ancient wisdom provided understanding of natural cycles and balance, while scientific training offered technological solutions that could accelerate healing without disrupting essential processes. As each trial neared completion, felt herself changing on a fundamental level. The genetic modifications triggered by the architect facility were reaching completion, transforming her into something beyond baseline humanity while still retaining everything that made her human. She could sense similar changes occurring in their already impressive capabilities expanding to match their new role as partners to an emerging spacefaring civilization. The fifth platform finally revealed itself as the other trials reached their conclusion. It wasn't a test of any specific skill or knowledge, it was a choice. Before them materialized the complete database of architect knowledge, technology that could transform humanity into gods among the stars. But accessing it would require abandoning leaving Earth and all its inhabitants behind to join the ranks of purely energy-based beings like the architects themselves. The alternative was to accept a more limited inheritance, enough knowledge to defend against the devourers and help humanity find its place among the starfaring civilizations, but remaining fundamentally human and connected to their origins. Choose wisely, the curator intoned. Many species have faced this decision. Most chose transcendence and were never seen again. A few chose to remain tied to their physical existence and built civilizations that endured for millions of years. Didn't hesitate. Through her link with she could feel their agreement. Transcendence might offer ultimate power, but it would mean abandoning everyone they cared about. True strength came from lifting others up alongside yourself, not leaving them behind. We choose to remain, she said firmly. We choose to grow together. The trials concluded in a blaze of light that seemed to emanate from and simultaneously. When her vision cleared, she found herself back in the main chamber, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed star charts showing safe routes through Devourer-controlled space, technological specifications for weapons and defenses that could hold off the ancient threat, and most importantly, the locations of other architect facilities where additional allies might be found. You have chosen well, the curator said, its ancient voice carrying what might have been approval. The trials are complete. Humanity and thee are now recognized as inheritor species, granted the knowledge and responsibility of maintaining the galaxy's balance against the darkness. But even as triumph filled the chamber, new alarms began to sound. The Devourer prison ships had detected the completion of the trials and were accelerating their approach too. The real test was about to begin, not a simulation or ancient challenge, but a battle for the survival of two civilizations and the future of countless others. And her allies had gained incredible new abilities and access to architect technology, but they were still vastly outnumbered by an enemy that had been perfecting the art of destruction for millions of years. The war for the galaxy's future was about to begin. The transformation of both and the pack was complete, but there was no time to fully understand their new capabilities. Through the facility's sensors, they could track the Devourer ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of solar system. The ancient prison vessels were massive beyond comprehension, each one the size of a small moon, their hulls covered in organic growths that pulsed with malevolent energy. How many beings were turned into those things? Whispered, horror filling her as the curator provided detailed scans of the approaching fleet. Each ship represents the transformed population of an entire world, the ancient AI replied. The Devourers consume not just life, but the essence of identity itself. What you see approaching are the remains of 17 civilizations, all merged into a collective hunger that can never be satisfied. Through her enhanced connection with felt their ancestral memories stirring. The pack carried genetic memories of the last time Devourer ships had approached this system, millions of years ago when their species was young and the architects still walked among the stars. The terror of that ancient encounter had been carved into their very DNA. But alongside the fear came something else, determination. They had spent countless generations preparing for this moment, and they would not fail now that they finally had worthy allies. What weapons do we have access to? Asked, her scientist's mind automatically cataloging their available resources. The answer came through direct data transfer into her consciousness. The facility contained automated defense systems that had been dormant since the Architect-era weapon platforms that could manipulate gravity, energy cannons that fired compressed starlight, and shield generators that could wrap entire planets in protective barriers. But all of these systems required operators with the specific genetic and neural modifications that she and the had just. More importantly, the facility's archives contained the specifications for creating additional inheritance chambers. With time, they could transform other humans and into defenders capable of wielding architect technology. But time was the one resource they lacked. The lead ship will reach firing range in 18 hours, Ra communicated through their mental link. We cannot hold them alone. His enhanced mind raced through possibilities, processing information at speeds that would have been impossible for baseline humanity. Then she remembered something from her earlier research, her team back at the main camp. Doctor, and the others had no idea what was happening, but they might be the key to survival. Curator, can the inheritance chambers be modified for rapid deployment? She asked urgently. The process normally requires 72 hours to complete safely, came the reply. However, emergency protocols exist that can compress the transformation into 6 hours. The risk of neurological damage is significant, but survivable for most subjects. 6 hours might be enough. If she could reach her team and convince them to undergo the transformation, they would have a small force of enhanced humans to work alongside the. It wouldn't be enough to stop 17 Devourer ships, but it might be sufficient to activate the facility's full defensive capabilities. I need to return to the surface, announced. My team can help us, but I have to reach them before the Devourers arrive. The journey back through the facility took on an urgency it hadn't possessed during their descent. The pack moved with fluid efficiency, their enhanced abilities allowing them to traverse the impossible architecture at incredible speeds. Found herself keeping pace easily, her transformed physiology adapting to demands that would have been lethal hours earlier. When they reached the surface, the ruins had completely transformed. What had appeared to be ancient, weathered stone was now revealed as sophisticated metamaterials that could reconfigure themselves at the molecular level. Weapon emplacements rose from concealed positions, their crystalline focusing arrays already tracking the approaching threat. Activated her emergency beacon, hoping that her team would respond quickly. To her surprise, the signal was immediately answered, not by Doctor, but by someone she didn't recognize. This is Colonel Sarah Martinez, Terran Colonial Defense Force, came the crisp military voice. Doctor, your team contacted us when you failed to report in. We have a full battalion inbound to your position. Felt a surge of hope. Military personnel would be ideal candidates for the rapid enhancement process, and a full battalion would provide enough enhanced defenders to properly operate the facility's systems. Colonel, I need you to listen carefully, transmitted. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but humanity's survival depends on you believing me. Over the next 10 minutes, provided a compressed briefing on everything that had happened. The Architect ruins, the transformation process, and the approaching Devourer fleet. She expected skepticism, even disbelief, but Colonel Martinez proved to be exactly the kind of officer the situation demanded. Doctor, we've been tracking unusual energy signatures from your location for the past 6 hours. Whatever's happening down there, it's already shown up on sensors across 3 star systems. We're 40 minutes out from your position, and we're bringing everything we have. When the Colonial Defense Force ships landed at the clearing, was amazed by what emerged. Colonel Martinez hadn't just brought a battalion. She had assembled a joint task force representing humanity's best end. Scientists, engineers, pilots, and soldiers, all volunteers who had answered the call when faced with an existential threat to their species. This is either the most important day in human history, or I'm about to make the worst decision of my career, Martinez said as she surveyed the transformed ruins. But the sensor readings don't lie. Those ships approaching us aren't anything in our databases, and the energy signatures suggest weapons that could crack a planet. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The inheritance chambers worked at maximum capacity, transforming groups of volunteers in rapid succession. The process was brutal, 6 hours compressed into minutes of agony as genetic codes rewrote themselves and neural pathways reorganized at accelerated rates. But human stubbornness proved equal to the challenge. Out of 200 volunteers, only 12 suffered permanent damage. and even they retained enough enhancement to contribute to the defense. As each group completed their transformation, they took their positions at weapon stations throughout the complex. They served as guides and coordinators, their pack-bonding instincts allowing them to integrate seamlessly with human command structures. What emerged was something neither species could have achieved alone, a unified defense force that combined human innovation with instinct. Doctor and Doctor were among the first to volunteer for enhancement, their scientific backgrounds making them ideal candidates for operating the facility's more complex systems. Watching her former colleagues adapt to their new capabilities filled with pride and amazement. The theoretical implications alone, Doctor marveled as she interfaced with a gravitational manipulation array. This technology is millions of years ahead of anything we've imagined. Save the wonder for later, Colonel Martinez interrupted, her enhanced senses already detecting the approach of the lead Devourer ship. According to these readings, we have 6 minutes before they're in weapons range. Through the facility's sensors, they watched the massive vessel approach its atmosphere. Its hull writhed with organic components that had once been the bodies of countless sentient beings, all twisted into a single collective consciousness driven only by hunger. Smaller craft detached from the main ship, fighters that moved with disturbing biological fluidity. "All stations, report ready status," Martinez commanded, her voice carrying across the complex through the neural links that now connected all enhanced personnel. The response was immediate and coordinated. Every weapon system was online, shield generators were at full power, and the enhanced defenders stood ready at their positions. Humans and working as a single organism, just as the architects had intended. "The moment has come," Ra transmitted to the entire force. "For generations, my people have waited for allies worthy of this fight. Today, we stand together against the darkness." The first Devourer fighters entered the atmosphere, their alien screams of hunger audible even through the vacuum of space. But they were met not by helpless prey, but by defenders wielding the concentrated wisdom and power of the galaxy's greatest civilization. The battle for and the future of all free life in the galaxy had begun. The first wave of Devourer fighters descended through its atmosphere like falling stars, their biomechanical hulls glowing with contained malevolence. Each craft pulsed with the tortured consciousness of beings who had been consumed and transformed into living weapons. Their hunger was so intense that it created distortions in local spacetime, making them difficult to target with conventional weapons. But the defenders of the Architect facility were far from conventional. Found herself at the central command nexus, her consciousness linked not just with the pack, but with every enhanced human in the complex. Through this unified network, she could coordinate defenses across multiple dimensions simultaneously, seeing the battle from dozens of perspectives at once. "First squadron of fighters, bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Lieutenant Hayes, one of the enhanced pilots now interfacing directly with the facility's automated defense systems. "They're moving in a formation I've never seen before." Through their shared awareness, everyone could observe the disturbing coordination of the Devourer fighters. They moved like parts of a single organism, flowing around obstacles with predatory grace while maintaining perfect tactical positioning. It was beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that these creatures had once been multiple species working together before their transformation into something monstrous. "Fire pattern Delta," Colonel Martinez commanded, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to process battlefield information at superhuman speeds. "Concentrate fire on the lead elements." The facility's weapon systems came online with devastating effect. Gravity cannons fired concentrated spacetime distortions that could crush matter down to the atomic level. Energy projectors released beams of captured starlight that burned through any known material. Shield disruptors created localized fields of entropy that caused enemy weapons to simply cease functioning. The first wave of Devourer fighters was destroyed within minutes, their biomechanical components unable to withstand weapons designed by beings who had transcended physical limitations. But even as they died, the creatures transmitted data back to their mothership, adapting and learning from each attack. "Second wave incoming," Doctor announced from her position monitoring long-range sensors. "They're adapting to our weapon signatures. The next attack will be much harder to repel." Through her connection with Ra, felt the Ancient's approval. This was exactly what the architects had intended, forcing defenders to constantly innovate and adapt rather than relying on static defensive positions. The trials had been preparation for this moment, when pure technological superiority wouldn't be enough to ensure victory. "Then we adapt too," replied, her enhanced mind already working on modifications to their weapon systems. Through the neural link, she shared her insights with the facility's AI cores, which began reconfiguring energy outputs and targeting algorithms in real time. The second wave proved to be a completely different challenge. Instead of direct assault, the Devourer fighters employed hit-and-run tactics, using their biological components to regenerate damage while striking at weak points in the facility's defenses. They had learned from the fate of the first wave, and were now fighting with the accumulated tactical knowledge of 17 different species. But they hadn't counted on human unpredictability. "All units switch to pattern chaos," Martinez ordered, using a tactical doctrine that existed only in human military training. Instead of coordinated defensive fire, each weapon system began operating independently, creating an apparently random pattern of attacks that was impossible to predict or counter. The Devourer fighters, evolved for perfect coordination, found themselves unable to adapt to truly chaotic opposition. Their attempts to anticipate and counter human tactics failed repeatedly as enhanced human creativity generated novel solutions faster than the enemy could process them. "It's working," Doctor reported from his position monitoring shield generators. "Their coordination is breaking down. They can't form effective attack patterns against random defense." But victory over the fighters was only the beginning. The massive Devourer mothership had finally entered Sorbit, its bulk blotting out entire sections of the star field. Through the facility's sensors, they could see the writhing mass of transformed beings that comprised its hull, millions of consciousness, merged into a single entity of pure hunger. "That thing could eat every living being on the planet and still want more," Colonel Martinez observed grimly. "Our current weapons aren't going to be enough." Felt a pulse of communication from the curator, the ancient AI sharing classified information that even the trials hadn't revealed. Deep within the facility lay the architect's ultimate defensive measure, a weapon that could project the user's consciousness across interstellar distances, allowing them to battle enemies on their own terms in the realm of pure thought. But using it would require perfect synchronization between human and minds, a level of cooperation that had never been achieved between different species. The risk of losing oneself in the merged consciousness was enormous, and failure would leave both species defenseless against the Devourer assault. "I'll do it," volunteered, but she felt immediate resistance from both her human colleagues and her partners. "Not alone," Ra communicated firmly. "We face this together as we have faced everything else." What followed was the most ambitious consciousness linking ever attempted. Not just in the pack, but every enhanced human in the facility joined their awareness into a single meta-mind that retained the individuality of each participant while gaining capabilities far beyond the sum of its parts. The resulting entity was something entirely new, neither human nor, but a true synthesis of both species' greatest strengths. It possessed human creativity and adaptability combined with instinct and coordination, all amplified by architect technology that had been waiting millions of years for worthy users. When their merged consciousness projected itself into space to confront the Devourer mothership, the battle that followed transcended physical reality entirely. It was fought in dimensions of pure thought and will, where the accumulated hunger of 17 consumed civilizations faced the combined determination of two species fighting for their right to exist. The Devourers were powerful beyond measure, their twisted consciousness capable of overwhelming entire star systems with despair and hunger. But they had made a fundamental error. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for something beyond oneself. Every human in the merged consciousness carried the memory of loved ones back on Earth, dreams of a better future, and the simple stubborn refusal to surrender that had driven their species to the stars. Every brought ancestral memories of protecting their world, the patient wisdom of generations spent preparing for this moment, and an unshakable loyalty to their chosen allies. Together, they represented something the Devourers couldn't comprehend, the willingness to sacrifice everything not for personal power, but for the chance to preserve what they loved. The battle raged across dimensions that had no names, through realms where mathematics and emotion were the same thing, in spaces where the laws of physics bent to the power of will. But gradually, inevitably, the merged consciousness began to prevail. The Devourer's greatest strength, their unified hunger, became their weakness when faced with opponents who fought not for conquest, but for protection. Their attacks, designed to overwhelm through sheer malevolent force, couldn't break through defenses powered by love, hope, and the absolute determination to prevent others from suffering the same fate that had befallen the consumed civilizations. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that won the battle, but something far more powerful, the realization that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. The Devourer mothership began to break apart as the tortured consciousness within finally found peace. Millions of transformed beings, freed from their endless hunger, simply chose to stop existing rather than continue their abomination. The ship's hull cracked and split, revealing the dead worlds at its core, and then even those faded into cosmic dust. When the merged consciousness finally separated back into individual minds, they found themselves forever changed. Humans, and were now bonded at a level that transcended species, sharing thoughts and emotions as easily as breathing. They had become something new, the first members of a truly interstellar civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. "It's over," Colonel Martinez said, though her voice carried wonder rather than relief. "The Devourer fleet is withdrawing. The remaining ships are falling back to whatever prison dimension they came from." Through the facility's communications array, they began receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Other species who had been hiding from the Devourer threat were emerging from concealment, drawn by the news that someone had finally stood up to the ancient menace and won. "Doctor," the curator's ancient voice filled the command center, "your species has passed the final trial. The galaxy awaits your leadership." But had learned too much about the price of power to be tempted by grand destinies. When she replied, her words carried the wisdom of someone who had seen both the heights of transcendence and the depths of cosmic horror. "We don't want to rule anyone," she said firmly. "We just want to help build something better, a galaxy where different species can work together as partners, not as conquerors and conquered." The response that came from across known space was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of civilizations requesting diplomatic contact, offering trade agreements, sharing technological advances, and most importantly, asking to learn about the cooperation techniques that had allowed two completely different species to merge their consciousness while retaining their individual identities. Humanity and the had become something unprecedented in galactic history, not the successors to the architects, but the founders of something entirely new. A civilization based on the radical idea that the greatest strength came not from domination, but from the willingness to extend trust across the vast differences that separated species among the stars. And on the crystal plains of, where ancient ruins hummed with peaceful energy, two species who had started as strangers continued their work of building bridges between worlds that had never dared to dream of true cooperation. The galaxy would never be the same,